to vote. The estimate is more than 500,000. Secondly, they're allowing wealthy people and banks to loan more and to give more to politicians, and that's a recipe for corruption. The third thing is they're allowing political parties to hide millions of dollars in campaign spending. The first loophole that's been introduced in election campaign spending disclosure in the last 20 years, and that's also a recipe for corruption and abuse of the law. Then they're also going to let the ruling party choose more frontline election workers at polling stations, which is dangerously undemocratic and unethical. And finally, they're not going to give the watchdogs the powers they need, and they're going to require the watchdogs to keep investigations on complaints and their rulings and decisions on complaints secret in almost every case, which will mean they can make biased decisions that favor one party over another and no one will ever know. The key is that everyone has to write the letter and send and express their concern, not just to the federal Conservatives who introduced the bill, but to all the federal party leaders, because this bill can be rammed through by the Conservatives. They have a majority, but it can also be reversed very soon if the 2015 election results in a different government. And so it's not only important to get the changes now if we can, but also to ensure that all the opposition parties are promising to change this if they get elected in 2015.
Good morning. My name is Tom Cooper. I'm director of the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. I would like to welcome all of you this morning to this very important community conversation. That video you just saw was brought to us by our friends at Operation Maple, so we'd like to thank them for sharing it with us. Before we get started, though, I would certainly like to bring up somebody who needs no introduction, our Mayor, Mayor Bertina, to bring greetings from the city. Mayor Bertina.
Tom, thank you, and thank you to the Roundtable for convening this important meeting. Hamilton's voice needs to be heard in national issues, and particularly this one, which speaks to the heart of democracy. Welcome to some familiar faces, of course. We have MP Dave Christopherson, who's no stranger to this chamber. Dave, welcome. And Wayne Marsden, MP, and Chris Charlton, thank you all for being here. Former Mayor Eisenberger, where are you? Up in the corner there, thank you. And to the rest, I'm sorry I can't stay for the meeting. Hopefully the one that I'm involved in now will end shortly, and I'll be able to come and hear the dialogue. Duff Conacher, whom you saw, is a really bright young man. I know in my radio talk show days I had him on many, many times on progressive issues, and the man knows what he's talking about. I'm very confident that this meeting today will result in an effective message, and I will do what I can as the mayor of the city of Hamilton to see that that message gets heard to where it needs to be. But I'm sure that our federal representatives will do that in their own great way as well. But this is the seat of our local democracy, so it's appropriate and fitting that we gather here, and I'm really looking forward to the outcome of what I'm sure is going to be a very positive day. Thanks so much, Tom, and thanks all.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a busy morning in store for us. We have a group of community leaders who will present to you about what the fair election means for our community. We have our local members of parliament, as Mayor Bertina indicated. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. David Sweet, the member of parliament for Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, Westdale, also sends his greetings but was not able to join us this morning. Fortunately, however, he and others who are not able to be here this morning are able to watch the proceedings thanks to Joey Coleman and the wonders of live streaming technology. So if you go to our website, www.hamiltonpoverty.ca, anybody can watch today's conversation proceed. When the first link of the chain is forged, when the first speech is censored, when the first freedom is curtailed, when the first vote is denied, we are all damaged. We are all chained. Today's conversation will talk about a very important bill that is in front of our federal parliament, Bill C-35. The opportunity for us to have a voice has never been more important. And I'd like to personally thank Laura Qatari for bringing us together today. Laura is, of course, a member of the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction and led today's organizing efforts. She's also a member of Canada Without Poverty on the board of directors of that organization, which has also spoken out strongly about the potential impact on voters and on our society. Joey Coleman, who I just mentioned, had an interesting tweet last week. He talked about the passing of one of Hamilton's last DEP vets. He was a member of the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, and it got me to thinking about the importance of what those men and women fought for more than 50 years ago. It was about freedom. It was about protecting our freedoms. And when they returned from war, when the women and men returned from Europe, they helped build a more just society here in Canada. They helped build the welfare state that came to look after all citizens. Today's bill, however, presents a serious challenge to many of those citizens of Canada. Many people may be disenfranchised, and today we will look for ways to ensure that their voices are heard. So with that, I would like to call on Laura Qatari to come and give us our first presentation. Laura.
If I do not have the power to say no, then my yes means nothing. If I do not have the power to say no, then my yes means nothing. That's a quote from John Block. He's an author, and he wrote a book called Community and Belonging. And though when I heard him speak, the topic was not voting, he was talking about community engagement. And community engagement is a noble pursuit. Engaging all people, having everyone a part of the conversation. And yet, when I think about it, I think we have to strive even harder, not engaging others, but actually seeking their participation. When I began my advocacy path a few years ago, I spoke a lot about poverty in particular. And underlying all my thoughts was not income, but empowerment. No individual moves forward, thrives, grows, and succeeds in our society while they're disempowered. So when I don't have the power to say no, enough, stop, your policy is hurting me, then my consent, governance, is meaningless. It's meaningless because there is no consent. If I cannot participate in this process, I don't participate in being governed. And right now, the Fair Election Act stands to disenfranchise over 120,000 Canadians. We are moving backwards. Less than 100 years ago, women, British subjects, got the right to vote in Canada. And non-enfranchised Aboriginals only got the right to vote in federal elections without losing status or lands in 1960. And it wasn't until 1982 when we brought home the Constitution and enacted the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that the right to vote was enshrined for all Canadians. So what? Really, what's so important now that it's a right? Well, rights are defined first and foremost as what we need as human beings. What we need as human beings to live with dignity. Imagine a world where you are told you do not have the right to work, and you will not work. You do not have the right to be with your family. You do not have the right to vote and have a say. We will tell you what you're doing. That's a world without dignity. Really, human rights define our humanity and how we see the world and our ideal of the world, and ever striving to perfect it. Unfortunately, most of us need something a little more concrete than the word dignity. So we explain a right and human rights and charter rights as a covenant between the governing and the governed. And we say, yes, you can govern us on these terms, that we are allowed these basic fundamental things. And in this country, despite the first past the post system and majority rule, these rights apply to everyone, even people who did not vote for you. And that's the important part. That these rights become a protection for all, despite their opinion and political differences. This is not partisan. This belongs to all people. And so today, what I'm hoping for is a conversation not whether there's a problem with voucher voting or not. Not for me personally. My problem with this is that if you are going to eliminate something, if you are going to change a system, then you talk to me about it. And you make sure that any change you make still includes us all. And look for viable options and solutions to those changes. It's not good enough to say most people have a driver's license or a passport. Most is not all. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you today and hearing what you have to say and bringing forward solutions and ideas and making all our voices heard. Thank you. And I also have the distinct honor and pleasure of getting to introduce all the presenters here today as well. Coming up next is Rosemary Russell. She's with the Council of Canadians and working with the Direct Democracy Group, and she has quite the presentation put together for us. Thanks, Rosemary.
Thank you, Laura. Well, it's an honor, and I'm nervous. So there you go. I'm not used to this kind of thing, but here we go. My topic, I was given free range. My topic today is grassroots civic engagement, and I really like free range because that's actually what democracy ought to be about, the right to speak. So I sit, and I'm proud to sit as a co-chair of the Direct Democracy Group with a fellow named Larry Pomerantz. He's with the Hamilton Civic League, and he's unable to be with us here today. Kathy Clark is the, where's my little button? Oh, great. Thank you. Kathy Clark is the chair of the local chapter of the Council of Canadians. And as a group, we are now about 3 years old. Not the first time we tried to get it together, but 3 years later, we're 300 members strong. That's pretty impressive because all of us are nothing but volunteers. We volunteer our time and our hearts and our hands to what we think of as important. In front of you is a list of our current working groups. We call them education action groups because we are coming together as we can, as we wish when we do, as individuals, to talk about the concerns of what we are calling the Commons. And that is not the House of Commons. We're calling it the Commons. Okay, we've got in this community concerns that are, of course, local and very personal, including how we fare in this society and how we fare going forward. Excuse me. So here is an identification of the themes that we deal with right now, and we're dealing with them locally, and we're dealing with them in terms of our understanding as wide as internationally. Okay. Okay, so here's how I've chosen to take an angle on Bill C-23, the Fair Elections Act. We see it, and I see it, as certainly a clarion call, but an opportunity to grow grassroots engagement, not just in this community, but in communities across the country. Click, please, thanks. Okay, so let me just get this out of the way. At its essence, it's a provocation, but it's not the first provocation that we've had in this country in the last number of years, I'll say. Okay, so at its essence, on at least 2 counts, if it goes through, I don't know, none of us know, but we're all pushing and we're making noise. It will be an infringement of constitutional rights, and so there will be likely to be challenges, constitutional challenges, charter rights challenges. So it at least gets that on the issue of the right for every Canadian to cast a ballot, and it gets that on the move to try to further muzzle the people who are trying to do a job for society, our senior parliamentary officials. Okay, click, please. Okay, I don't want to get into this. I know that you are all familiar. I just want to make one point. We are already an uninformed, a misinformed, an underinformed public, and this is going to help us become more of that. That looks good for the future of Canadians, doesn't it? We are already suffering degradation of our democratic system here in Canada, and now we're going to push for, or what's being pushed for, is an unaccountable electoral system. Click, please. Thank you. So we already have a non-voting public and a non-representative electoral process in place, and now we're just going to cinch it. Sounds great. Click, please. Okay. At the Council of Canadians, we don't... How's my time? 2 minutes, okay. At the Council of Canadians, local chapter and across the country, we don't think the story starts at all with this particular act. It doesn't even start with the federal election in 2011. Click, please, if you've had a chance to read, that's good. The story began long before that with the erosion of what is fast becoming clearly an outmoded parliamentary system of democracy in this country. Here are Judge Mosley's findings, or at least some of them. You can capture them online if you have not seen them. Click, please. Basically, fraud was committed, widespread fraud was committed, database was used, CPC database was used. It was established in the court. So what does that point to? A friendly dictatorship? I don't think so. Click, please. Because right now, other Canadians are waking up to the facts that you who have worked in the social justice trenches have been knowing for years, that this is not a friendly way to govern. And more to the point, there are numbers of Canadians that are coming together in grassroots movements to say it is not any longer going to need to be about being governed. It is about us waking up to governing ourselves. Press, please. So, how do we do that? Well, here's what the Council of Canadians did. I'm not going to go into it. Please, if you want to access information, go for it. They took it on. They took on, when the robocall stuff started showing up, they began to mobilize their people, their resources, their energy, and their heart to have Canadians and support Canadians in standing up to what had happened in the 2011 election. You can find it online. Please click. Okay, locally, 1 minute? Okay. Woo. Okay, the Council of Canadians chapter, excuse me. We've been doing a lot, but we've been doing it one person at a time, one consciousness at a time. When moved, we've been doing it collaboratively, we've been doing it online, we've been doing it on the phone, we've been doing it face-to-face in conversations with our political representatives and with one another. So there's a list of the kinds of things we've been doing. Press, please. Questions been asked, what if? Okay, so what if? To us at Please Press, it makes really little difference because we're just going to keep on doing what we have been doing, which is growing grassroots engagement and taking action. How would I say this? If I take the Council of Canadians as one example of a watchdog organization, I can say, okay, it's since the mid-'80s, it's been growing grassroots mobilized activity. And look at all the ones that have come on board since. Look at what's come on board in the last year. Look at what's growing in this community. Together, all we're doing is strengthening the fabric of this society and saying it's time for us to create change. Not to be subjected to change, but to actually be the subject of bringing change about. Click, please. I just want to make an invitation to you, not only to check out the the local chapter of the Council of Canadians, and perhaps considering becoming involved in some of our work. Personally, we would like to invite you to join us for our next chapter meeting, which is Tuesday evening at Volunteer Hamilton's offices. Some of you will know Norman Kearney. He's our next guest speaker. He was involved in bringing about participatory budgeting in Ward 2. Participatory budgeting is a form of direct democracy. Our group, the direct democracy group of the chapter, is exploring and talking and learning not only how to engage, but how to talk about changing a form of democracy that is not able to meet the demands of our times. Thank you. Hope I haven't gone over. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That's amazing. And no, I don't have a big cane to drag any of our speakers off if they go over 5 minutes, so it's all good. Thank you so much, Rosemary. Next up this morning, we have with us Alex Johnstone. And Alex is here, actually, in her role as school board trustee. And I'm going to let her explain what she's going to be talking about. Thanks, Alex.
Good morning. So as I was introduced, I am a school board trustee here in Hamilton, and I also represent the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board provincially at the Ontario Public School Board Association. And I'm part of a committee that actually reviews legislation and reviews policies such as the Fair Elections Act. And so a group of us work together to draft our concerns. And our president, Michael Barrett, actually came out with a letter. And last week, I'm pleased to say, our local school board endorsed this letter expressing all of our concerns. I'm going to share some of those concerns with you today. So as municipal politicians, we strive to raise the profile of democratically elected school board trustees so that our electorate can have direct contact to the local decision making. We strive as well to increase participation in the democratic process at all levels of government. And as an educational institution, we strive as well to increase the participation in the democratic process at all levels of government. Part of this has been our advocacy to highlight Local Government Week, which takes place every October. This has been an opportunity to engage students in both elementary and secondary schools in learning about civic awareness, knowledge of the electoral process, and the importance of exercising democratic rights and the fundamental Canadian value of the right as a citizen to have one's voice heard. As an educational institution, we're all about creating the values of our Canadian values and enforcing those in our students. And certainly the electoral process is a big part of our civic responsibility and who we are as Canadians. The proposed legislation completely contradicts the actions we are undertaking with regard to increasing public awareness. Trustees are dismayed to learn that the proposed changes will limit the role of Elections Canada, which is an independent, nonpartisan agency, and that these limitations will further result in the cancellation of public education and information programs. This will have a profound impact on voter engagement, particularly for those who are more likely to experience difficulties in exercising their democratic rights. A concrete example of this is student vote. For those of you who are not familiar with student vote, during the last provincial election, 2,807 schools participated in a mock election where, riding by riding, they actually voted for their own local candidates. This is an amazing process to get students engaged and aware, and youth engaged and aware of the democratic process. And this is one of the programs that is at risk. This is just one of the major programs that is now in jeopardy, and trustees fail to understand why the Government of Canada would introduce legislation that would eliminate a program that promotes civic engagement among the generation of young people who are to be the future of this country. We are also concerned about the elimination of identification methods, such as the voucher system. This creates barriers and obstacles, and reliable reports indicate that as many as 100,000 people could be prevented from exercising their voter rights. The bill proposes to remove voter identification cards and the methods of vouching. We agree with others that these changes will eliminate a portion of voters who are already marginalized in society. Those include youth, seniors, Aboriginal people, and disabled people. In a fair and open and democratic society, legislative bills are to be given opportunity for full discussion. This bill certainly did not have that opportunity. The bill was first introduced on February 4th, 2014, and only 4 days later, after second reading debates, it was referred to committee. Public hearings about the legislative changes that affect the rights of all citizens should not be narrowly confined to Ottawa. So we join the voices of all Canadians who see the Fair Elections Act as anything but. Our children, parents, and community members expect us to lead by example. As school board trustees, we oppose measures that limit the rights of the public to fully participate in the democratic elections and to have access to information that supports and encourages them to exercise their democratic rights. Thank you.
My apologies. I had to check my own agenda. Thank you for that, Alex. Next up, we have a really passionate speaker, and I love hearing her thoughts. I'd like to welcome Evelyn Meary from Hamilton Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you for organizing this, the Hamilton Roundtable Against Poverty, for poverty reduction, as well as all the other organizations who helped to organize this day. I think it's important that as we build our democracy, as we strengthen our democracy, that we take opportunity to share our perspective and our voices when things seem to be going awry. And I think in this particular case, it is certainly doing so. As an organization with a mission to create a welcoming and inclusive community in Hamilton, HCCI feels that the Fair Elections Act is ill-advised. The conservative government proposed act will potentially impact the voter participation rate of new Canadians and ethnocultural communities in future elections. We believe that the banning of the voucher system would create a serious problem of denial of a ballot, as it will disenfranchise new Canadians, along with others, as many of the two speakers have spoken about, youth, seniors, Aboriginal, disabled, and the like. And we believe that it's important that immigrants, we are trying so much across Hamilton to engage newcomers, racialized communities in the democratic process. We recently received a grant that we're working with communities to help racialized communities and women to be more engaged in the political process. On that hand, and now on this hand, we're hearing that the government of Canada is attempting to limit those participations. So we are troubled by the direction of this government. The Ontario Coalition of Agencies Serving Immigrants, of which HCCI is a member, recently expressed its sentiments opposing the bills as well by saying that those who are less likely to be on the voter list or those with ID deemed inappropriate. A good portion of those people are newcomers, new Canadians, people who recently arrived in Canada and gotten their certification of their Canadian citizenship, but they're not well versed in the electoral process. We feel that those persons and those individuals will be greatly disenfranchised. And Debbie Douglas, a very passionate speaker out of Toronto who speaks for Ocasio, said that the fact that they will be showing up to vote and not find their name on the list or to have their voter's card and not have appropriate ID will absolutely disenfranchise them. So while we acknowledge that disfranchisement will affect many people, we know that disproportionately immigrants, newcomers, racialized communities are going to be negatively impacted further. So we call for all of us to, use our intersectionality in our assessment to bring those voices and those issues in an embedded way whenever we speak to make sure that those communities and their voices are absolutely embedded in any presentations as we move forward. And I'm so happy that you asked me from HCCI to be a part of this. This view from Ocasio is also supported by Canada's Chief Electoral Officer, as I'm sure you've heard, Mark Mirand, who says removing the possibility of vouching at the federal levels takes away the last safety net for those electors who do not have the necessary documents to prove identity and residency. And as was said earlier, more than 120,000 Canadians relied on vouchers in the last election. So we know those persons will be disenfranchised if this bill is passed. Another significant area that will have this disproportionate impact on immigrants and newcomers and racialized people around the voter, will impact their voter turnout, is the proposal to disempower Elections Canada from encouraging Canadians to vote. As this first speaker mentioned, we are not impressed with our level of voter turnout already. So for us to take actions to further diminish that is troubling. And Elections Canada, who in the past have developed a number of outreach strategies and education work to get the vote out among ethnocultural communities and new Canadians prior to and during the election season would no longer be under this proposed bill. The responsibility to educate Canadians about voting will now fall to federal parties. This is troubling indeed. Those with more money will have the opportunity to share information more with voters and with educate voters, or ask me to say, organize something for this party to talk to immigrants. And who is there? Who's the pipe who plays? What's that saying? The pipe who plays the tune? Who pays the who pays the piper calls the tune. That's right. Thank you. So I'm really troubled by, that lack of level playing field. According to a new report by the New Canadian Media, in 2011, Elections Canada engaged in a community outreach to provide ethnocultural communities with important information on how, when, and where to exercise their right to vote. They delivered messages by setting up information kiosks, making presentations, hosting discussion groups, and distributing communication materials. Now that will be done by the federal parties. That is not absolutely, that's totally undemocratic. Special efforts were made to inform and engage groups and communities that were likely to experience difficulty in exercising their right to vote, or those who could be easily reached through Elections Canada advertisement campaigns. Ads were featured in multiple languages on specialty television and radio, in community newspapers, as well as the internet. So these now, with the abolition of disempowering Elections Canada to outreach very aggressively to harder to reach electorals, we know that it's going to have a negative impact on the voter turnout among racialized and newcomers in our communities. That is troubling. And I will not go, I think the two main points, the voucher system, we know we have negative impact on the cultural communities, more so, as well as the fact that the outreach and your education done by Elections Canada, which are significant in terms of encouraging people to get out and vote, and the translation services and interpretation services as offered, is important. So that will definitely impact negatively on our democracy. There are some who say that this proposed change echoes, it sounds like what we call in the United States the voter suppression approach, which we know it is not, but certainly it smells like it. We are concerned about the taking away, disenfranchising of Canadians to get the vote. So we are troubled by that. And we hope that this is not another U.S.-style voter suppression being emulated by our federal government. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Next up, we have Audra Petroulis of the YWCA. I was honored to meet Audra during Women's Leadership Summit a number of years ago, and her topic today actually does refer to women. So if you can come up and let us know how this impacts women, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Good morning. We good? Can you hear me? No? Better? Better? Great. Even louder? We're good? We're good? Okay, good morning. My name is Audra Petroulis. I'm the interim supervisor of the Transitional Housing Program at YWCA Hamilton. Our program temporarily houses up to 65 women in Hamilton for up to 11 months. When women are with us, they receive support from our women's advocates in-house and from community supports out in the community. Our goal is to see that women have the rights, resources, and opportunities to shape their own lives and define their communities. Our residents come to us with histories of domestic violence, childhood abuse, addictions, and mental health issues, as well as a solid understanding of the system in which they are trapped. Many of our women have little to no contact with their family of origin, have a history with the legal system, and face systemic discrimination based on gender, race, class, sexual orientation on a daily basis. These are the most resilient and resourceful women I have ever known. Marginalized women, like the ones we work with at YW, have very little to call their own, including a voice. Our democratic society dictates that all citizens have the right and responsibility to exercise their right to use their voice by voting. The Fair Elections Act is suppressing the voice of homeless women in Hamilton and beyond. For a homeless woman, the task of applying or reapplying for a government-issued ID suitable to present at the voter poll is daunting. Lack of funds for the processing fee, English as a second language or literacy issues, and the inability to provide a permanent address are all examples of the roadblocks that homeless and precariously housed women face with this new limitation outlined in BC 23. A recent participant in our transitional housing program shared that before she came to us, she was living in an abusive relationship with her partner, and there was a physical assault in the house where she was physically grabbed, and her purse and her wallet went flying across the kitchen floor, and all of her ID was scattered across the kitchen floor. So she knew where her ID was. It was in that house underneath the refrigerator, but there was no way that she was going to go back to that matrimonial home because it wasn't safe for her. Precariously housed women in Hamilton also face challenges to using their voice on Election Day. According to the Social Planning and Research Council, in 2001, 7,000 women and their families were at risk of homelessness, and 3,000 additional women made up Hamilton's hidden homelessness. These are women who are couch surfing on a friend's futon, living in their car, or working full-time jobs but still living under the poverty line. Homeless and precariously housed women in Hamilton benefit from the vouching system and the use of voter information cards as valid ID. Vouching is used by folks who can prove who they are but not where they live, essential to the transient population of homeless women we serve in Hamilton. As women move from shelter to shelter, surviving the system, they do not and cannot update their address as they know it's not permanent. Emergency shelters provide space for up to 6 weeks, and transitional housing space is up to a year. The women in these temporary spaces are valued and valuable members of the community who deserve to have the opportunity to shape their future by showing up on Election Day and producing ID that they have, regardless of the address. The government's plan to eliminate voter information cards would effectively disenfranchise about 120,000 voters, among them transient and homeless people and the hidden homeless, who do not or cannot secure proper identification with a fixed address. For homeless and precariously housed women in Hamilton who regularly find themselves in the margins of society, exercising their right to vote would foster empowerment and efficacy, the components necessary for shaping one's own life and defining one's community. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and a really poignant reminder of what's at stake. Thank you. Next up, I have, and I didn't tell him, so it may be a surprise, Eric Gillis from McMaster Student Union. He's going to share with us our concerns from McMaster. Thank you. Do you want me to be your clicker?
I'm just going to bring this over here. Yeah. Okay. So, hi everyone, my name is Eric Gillis, as was said before, and I'm from the McMaster Students Union. And just a quick blurb about us: we are the student association responsible for representing over the over 22,000 undergraduate full-time students at McMaster. And we have taken a stance on this issue, and they should pay their license. Okay. Anyway, so we've taken a stance on this issue, and we do think that there's some serious concerns with the Fair Elections Act bill that's being put forward. One of the primary ones that we have is, well, the fact that there's been a declining voter turnout within Up there? Okay. Yeah. There's been a declining voter turnout within the last about 60 years. In the last federal election, there's only a 38.8% youth turnout. That means 38.8% of the youth that were eligible to vote actually exercised their democratic right to vote, and that's a serious concern. Another primary concern we have is just the general electoral disengagement in general. We're concerned that this is going to increase the barriers for youth to actually exercise their democratic rights. And finally, our last concern is that this bill is going to eliminate get out the vote campaigns, and we're really concerned about that because it's going to reduce the availability of neutral information that is available to first-time voters, of which students and youth make up a large chunk. And ultimately, with all of these three concerns taken into consideration, our main concern is that it will lead to less youth engagement. So, just speaking to declining voter turnout, in the most recent election, 61.4% of the voters actually voted. That was the third lowest in Canadian history. However, just before that, in 2008, we had the lowest voter turnout ever of, I believe, 58%. And that's really troublesome because if you take a look at this chart, from 1957 onwards, you can see that the voter turnout has been a downwards trend. And it's really concerning then, if it's a downwards trend, that what the government seems to be thinking is beneficial to be putting forward is something that will likely increase or decrease the amount of voters actually voting. When that's the reality right there in front of you. You can't really argue with the numbers. And that really begs the question, is disenfranchisement and further electoral disengagement a good price to pay for potentially eliminating voter fraud? We believe that safeguards to protect against voter fraud should never disenfranchise a Canadian citizen. However, unfortunately, squirrel wheel's getting me. However, we believe that that should be the exact effect that's going to be had if this Fair Elections Act is passed in its current form. That's a serious issue because students rely on vouching. At McMaster specifically, we have students that come from all over the province, even the country. And a lot of the time, they may not have the proper ID, be it they don't have mail that comes to their address or their license doesn't show the address they're currently at. They may just not simply have the ID, but they may live here for 4 to 5 years during their undergrad and not be allowed to vote in the riding that they've been engaged with for the last 4 or 5 years of their life. And with eliminating vouching, they're no longer going to be able to have a way to get around that. And we're sincerely concerned that by eliminating vouching, we're going to be sincerely limiting the ability of students to participate in their own democracy. And then I just want to speak to the importance of Get Out the Vote campaigns. So research shows that Get Out the Vote campaigns have a substantial impact on voter turnout. Specifically, the Yale University Institution on Social Policies released a study that shows there's a direct correlation between Get Out the Vote campaigns being held and electoral turnout. It's a positive correlation. And so it's really concerning then that we're proposing to eliminate that with this bill. Elections Canada holds these campaigns and provides neutral information to voters who may very likely be first-time voters and not have the information they need to get this sort of informed decision that we think is really important for students to be able to make. So, finally, just to speak to our position based on that, we do stand behind Get Out the Vote campaigns being orchestrated by Elections Canada and believe they should not be cut due to their obvious benefit and merit. In addition, we think that any changes that the government makes in terms of electoral reforms, given the state of federal engagement in Canada, should be ones that focus upon making voting easier, not harder. We sincerely hold hope that the government will realize these concerns and hold cross-country consultation and actually talk to the citizens about what they feel is going forward. Because as it stands, we can't support this, and we really, really do hope the federal government realizes these concerns that we've brought forward today. That's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for that, Eric. And actually, I think a lot of the presenters are actually generating more questions in me than actual answers at this point, which is good. This is what we want. It'll create a really great discussion later. Next up, we have Peter Graefe. He's a professor of political science with McMaster University, and we ask for some of his wisdom. Peter, please.
Well, I'd like to thank Laura and Tom for inviting me. Tom used the term community leader, but unlike everyone else on the panel, I haven't really led anything except a charge to the buffet. But in some ways that's important, because as much as we tend to extol leadership, really what this is about is followership. What we as voters can do to ensure that our elected members represent the values and the priorities of our community. And elections are a way that we exercise that control over our leaders, which is fundamental to the way we rule ourselves. And so a fundamental question in this, it seems to me, and I'm going to repeat a lot of what people have said, but is to ask whether the Elections Act and elections belong to us as citizens or if they belong to the parties. Right? Are they public goods? Are there public goods around elections in terms of legitimacy and participation? Or is it really just about partisan advantage, that whoever holds power gets to determine what the rules are? And I think it's probably around those issues. I wore my uniform of an academic today. And it's around those sorts of values of legitimacy and participation that we saw, for instance, 460 academics sign that open letter in the major papers this week. Of course, that and a ticket will get you on the HSR. But again, it's important that in many different fronts, people express to a variety of their organizations today why they think this is a problematic bill. I'll speak to two kind of quick points. I mean, the first that we've maybe spent a bit less time talking about today is a question of parties that won in a riding being able to appoint the poll supervisors in the subsequent election. Now, I mean, we do have problems with poll supervisors. In my time active in elections, I've run across a lot of little petty tyrants in elections offices. And there's problems because it's a complex job, given at the last minute with very little training, with little room for error. There are no second chances. If you send someone home saying they're not voting in the right place, chances are they aren't going to go vote somewhere else. Right? If you make a decision and it's wrong, well, the day is over and there's nothing really you can do to appeal it. So it's a complex and difficult job. And so there probably is room to improve the functioning of those offices. But the solution of partisanship, of appointing people from parties, is not really one that's going to solve any of those problems of lack of training, but it's going to create two potential other issues. Now, a lot of people have said, the potential for abuse, that parties could use this to systematically deny certain people the right to vote or make it difficult. That's possible. I tend to be an optimist and see that as less likely, but it's still there, and that's a danger. What's actually maybe more dangerous is that all kinds of small mistakes become politicized, so that we have situations where poll workers don't show up and polls don't open for several hours into the day, as have happened in recent elections. And rather than saying that's because the poll supervisor was hungover, it's going to be because they're from party X or party Y, right? And so these small mistakes will come to really undermine the sort of legitimacy and perceived neutrality of the process, right? Rather than being seen as, the mistakes made by individuals. So to me, that's an important issue in terms of the legitimacy of the program, in addition to the potential for abuse. The other point I was asked to speak to today was the sort of changes with respect to Elections Canada. In part, their research function. Right, an important thing that may get limited through this is the capacity of Elections Canada to do the public good of seeing how elections are run in other places, what new technologies are evolving. I have a colleague, for instance, who studied e-voting in conjunction with Elections Canada to say, is there a way? And in fact, if we wanted to take pressure off those polling offices, e-voting might be I don't really like e-voting, but e-voting might be an answer to those. But we lose the capacity of Elections Canada to be on the forefront of knowing what's happening in elections and what the best practice is, if we take away that research function. The other is this kind of question of student vote, education, and get out the vote programs. And I think that's something worth fighting for, but I think if we think that's really what is going to ensure people vote, then we also have a problem. I think we have to push much further in terms of thinking about these things. I mean, it's not just Elections Canada that should be teaching civics. And I think we have a fundamental problem. We teach people math and reading, but preparing people to participate in a democracy does not seem to be in the forefront of the curriculum. And given that, that a sense of citizenship is really important in pushing young people to start voting and keeping voting, I think there's more that could be done there. The other is to say that in some ways and in some parts of elections, actually, there is a role for partisanship. And so we certainly want Elections Canada to be doing the sorts of forms of education, of informing communities, of translation that people spoke to. But it's not as if we're doing a really fabulous job of getting these communities out to vote in the current period. And here, I think partisanship actually may be quite important. People are organized into voting as much as they are educated into voting. Right? And if parties and other organizations in our community aren't preparing people to vote, aren't showing them that there's a reason to vote, that's not going to happen. I mean, the electorate expanded not just because the vote was extended, but because movements showed people that there was something they could win with their vote. And that's something that I think has to be thought about. I mean, indeed, and this is, I'm not going to make a case for voter suppression, but if we look at the United States, where I think we've seen concerted campaigns of voter suppression, one of the responses, of course, is by the Democratic Party to actually do a lot more organization around preparing people to vote, and obviously in the process passing their democratic ideas into the voice of the ears of people voting. So, the other side of these things is that these laws are important. We want the right sets of laws, but how we use them is also important. And so, while I think we should fight to protect some useful things around the Elections Act that are there, it's not like it was a perfect act beforehand. And sometimes I think we have to imagine better ways where we can go further. I mean, 58%, 60% is not a wonderful turnout, right? 38% of youth, right? The Elections Act as it is isn't doing great wonders for our democracy. It's maybe better than what's being proposed as a solution. But I think if we want all members of our community to participate and have a voice, we have to find ways of pushing much more forward.
Thank you for that, Peter. Wonderful. Last but certainly not least is the addition of Malcolm Buchanan to our agenda today. Malcolm comes to us from the Canadian Union of Retirees, and we're glad to have his voice here today. Malcolm, would you please come up?
Thank you very much. I'd like to also thank the organizers for putting on this event today. I think it's very important. I'd just like to put it on the record right up front that the Congress of Union Retirees is totally and unquestionably opposed to Bill C-23. I'd also like to tell you that our national organization is opposed to it, our provincial organization is opposed to it, the Canadian Labour Congress is opposed to it, because the Congress of Union Retirees, which I'm the president of the Hamilton, Burlington, Oakville chapter, is a member of the Canadian Labour Congress as a direct affiliate. So the trade union movement is opposed to this legislation for all of the reasons that have been stated here today. Now, from a point of view of our organization, we believe that this is a direct attack against the voting rights of seniors, and particularly those seniors who find themselves, through no fault of themselves, who have to change their addresses suddenly because they have to be admitted into a nursing home, for example, or into a hospital or wherever it is, and they have no valid, therefore, ID address at that time for the vote. So those folks are going to be disenfranchised if the process of vouching is destroyed. So this could have a direct effect, as I say, on seniors through no fault of themselves, find themselves relocated into a nursing home, etc., during the election process itself. Now, Kirk has not been idle in this fight on Bill C-23. I'd like to just tell you that on March 27th, we addressed a letter to the Minister of State, Pierre Poilievre, and we've highlighted a number of our concerns. For example, Bill C-23 will stop some eligible voters from voting by making it more difficult for them to register at the polls. Vouching will no longer be acceptable. It also stops voters from using the voter card sent out by Elections Canada as valid ID. The claims that vouching and the use of Elections Canada voter cards has led to widespread misuse and fraud has proven to be untrue. Several MPs who have made these claims have had to retract their allegations since they based their facts on hearsay. For example, Conservative MP Brad Butt told MPs that he had personally witnessed people taking voter information cards out of recycling bins to be handed out to other people to vote. Mr. Butt later said he misspoke and said that he had not personally witnessed any such activity. Bill C-23 contains a proposal that would allow a political party to exclude from its campaign expenses. This one has not been hit upon, but it's a very dangerous one. It would allow a political party to exclude from its campaign expenses the cost of raising funds from previous donors. Why? How will democracy be served by including this proposal in Canada's Election Act? It seems designed to promote political advantage rather than electoral fairness. Bill C-23 also proposes that the winning party, and this has been addressed very briefly, the winning party in each riding will be given the power to nominate that riding's central poll supervisors. We remind you, Mr. Minister, that the central poll supervisors are in charge of polling locations. Under the current Elections Act, they are chosen by the non-partisan officials of Elections Canada. This is how it should be. Bill C-23 would open the door to political corruption, or potentially, if not a fact. Bill C-23 will also restrict Elections Canada's ability to investigate alleged political wrongdoing. The bill reduces the investigating powers of Elections Canada, an independent organisation that reports directly to the House of Commons, by moving the Commissioner into the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions will not improve the ability of Elections Canada to investigate alleged violations of the Elections Act. In the words of Mark Mayran, the Chief Electoral Officer, both he and the Commissioner would be restricted in terms of how they communicate with one another and with Canadians, including what they can tell the public about matters or persons under investigation. As the Globe and Mail states, a real progressive paper, mind you, building walls between parts of Election Canada and between investigations and the public makes no sense. Bill C-23 places severe limitations on the ability of Elections Canada to consult with Canadians and to be able to disseminate information on electoral democracy, as well as to publish research. The legislation will make it harder for Elections Canada to do its non-partisan job. Elections Canada has been concerned that voter turnout during federal elections has been declining. To help address this problem, Elections Canada has conducted public outreach campaigns designed to counter declining voter participation by encouraging people to vote. Mr. Minister, you have not been able to provide any credible reason for ending Elections Canada's public outreach campaigns, other than quoting examples of non-existing advertising conducted by Elections Canada. Bill C-23, Mr. Minister, prohibits Elections Canada from promoting youth outreach and education initiatives such as Student Vote, a non-partisan school program that encourages young people to participate in the electoral system. It should be noted that over 500,000 students learned about the voting system and were encouraged to participate in school elections during the 2011 federal election. In introducing Bill C-23, you were quoted as saying that the legislation will help eliminate fraud and improve voter participation in the electoral process. Nothing could be further from the truth. There has been no widespread documentation of election fraud by the use of vouching. It's a myth perpetuated by the Conservative Party. Bill C-23 is supported by neither evidence nor public consensus. There is also international condemnation. Professors from universities from the United States right through to my home country, New Zealand, that condemns this legislation. They state in an open letter, "We believe that this act would prove to be deeply damaging for electoral integrity in Canada, as well as providing an example which, if emulated elsewhere, may potentially harm international standards of election rights." Now, I say that because Canada is held by many countries as a very progressive country, and electoral rights that we have should be enjoyed elsewhere. This type of legislation is going to curtail that and it's be a black mark against Canada. In particular, the changes would undermine the integrity of the election process, diminish the effectiveness of Elections Canada, reduce voting rights, expand the role of money in politics, and foster partisan bias in election administration. You claim that Bill C-23 will improve Canada's democratic voting process, thereby making it more accountable and accessible to all Canadian citizens. In fact, Bill C-23 would do the exact opposite. We urge you to withdraw the bill. Needless to say, I have not received a response. That letter was also sent to David Sweet, who, by the way, did respond. He said, Malcolm, you've raised some very interesting points. I'm unable to answer them. I'm referring it to the minister to respond to you. That's how much knowledge David Sweet has about electoral reform in this country. Further to the letter, Kirk has some additional concerns. The elimination of balloting and voter information cards are extremely dangerous proposals. They are designed for voter suppression, not for improving voter participation. Currently, Elections Canada uses the voter information cards as proof of address for seniors and residences and long-term care facilities, as I mentioned before, students on campus and First Nation voters living on reserves. If the voter information cards are eliminated as ID, many potential voters will be disenfranchised. Seniors have had to move residences due to health issues, so they cannot vote where they used to live, and they no longer have a current driver's license, passport, or statement of government benefits. With a new address in it, they will be disenfranchised if vouching is eliminated. The same holds true for those citizens with vision problems. They require someone to vouch for them. Eliminating vouching and refusing voter information cards as proof of address, Bill C-23 undermines the right to voter protection by Section 3 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, a constitutional entitlement so fundamental that it cannot be limited by the Charter's notwithstanding clause. There is no doubt that the bill's voter restrictions will be challenged in court for violating the constitutionality of protected rights to vote. In place of Bill C-23, Kirk would also recommend the following proposals. Give more power to Elections Canada to investigate alleged wrongdoing. Give Elections Canada stronger powers to get whatever documentation they need from political parties, writing associations and candidates to ensure fair election rules are always followed. That the practice of crossing the floor to another political party be disallowed. In its place, Elections Canada will rule that the MP in question has resigned his or her seat and that a by-election be held within 60 days of the resignation. That the current system of first past the post be replaced by an electoral proportional representation model. And you can see Fair Vote Canada for some of the suggestions they have. HBO Kirk urges the Harper government to heed reason, evidence and experience provided by expert witnesses. The government should withdraw Bill C-23 to begin with. To quote the Globe and Mail, and this is the conclusion, on April 12th, just the other day, and this is what they said, there is no evidence that Canada has a voting fraud problem. This lack of evidence, a lack of interest in evidence, are the most disturbing part of the push to pass the Fair Elections Act. Does the government have any studies supporting the bill? No. Any independent research? No. The government planned to ram through the Fair Elections Act. Critics be damned, experts be damned, evidence be damned, has been a case of partisanship squared. Thank you very much for your time.
I saved some spice for the end. I hope you liked it. No. Speaking of spice, our next speaker I know is incredibly passionate, and he's actually one of our members of elected parliament. I'd like to welcome to give his addresses David Christopherson.
Thank you, Laura. I don't know what that portends, but we'll see. Broke City Hall. I tried to fix it a while ago. Listen, I am so glad to be here. And Laura, thank you very much, and Tom and the Poverty Roundtable. Quite frankly, my fellow Hamiltonians, this is exactly the kind of discussion, the kind of debate, and the kind of interaction that should be happening in every community across Canada long before any new election bill ever hits the floor of our House of Commons. Feel free to throw something at me, shut me down, give me the hook, because I want to go through a few things. First thing I wanted to do is to talk about the process, and there's nothing new that I haven't mentioned that others haven't. I'm just underscoring the importance of all these things. It is mind-boggling that there is an election law reform bill in the House of Commons that not only didn't get your consultation, but they did not even consult the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada. They did not consult with him. This is an agent of Parliament. He's on the same status, has the same status as the Auditor General. The Chief Electoral Officer, to protect your rights, does not report to the government, reports to Parliament. Parliament is all of us. The government is pretty much the cabinet. I can't imagine a democracy in the world, if they were really concerned about improving things, bringing in a new election law without even consulting the Chief Electoral Officer. I can't say that enough because it's mind-boggling. Not only that, they did not even consult with the Commissioner of Elections. They did not consult, let alone consult with the opposition parties. I mean, we just had the Olympics not that long ago. Can you imagine if the system was such that whoever was the host country, the host country, yeah, that's another speech. That another country would possibly bring in something like this. I lost my train of thought there. So, lack of consultations with the official opposition, the Olympics, here's the deal. It's no different than saying that the host country gets to decide all the rules for all of the sports. That's nuts. Obviously, in order to have a free and fair Olympics, you need to make sure that everybody agrees on what the rules are, so that if the rules are fair to everyone, it will be the conduct of the athletes that determines who wins, not through any kind of skewing of the process. Well, elections are exactly the same way. If we want elections to be fair, one of the first things you do is talk to the other parties that are represented in the House, even talk to other parties that aren't even in the House, and give them a chance to give some input as to what is fair, so that when we go into an election, we all agree, regardless of how upset or pleased we might be with the outcome, we all agree that it was a fair fight and that fair rules were applied. That did not happen here. That did not happen. There was no, I'm going to say it again, there was no consultation with the Chief Electoral Officer. There was no consultation with the Elections Commissioner. There was no consultations with any of the opposition parties, and there was no consultations with Canadians. In fact, the only people who got any say in this bill were card-carrying Conservatives. Only. Because you need to know that this bill originally was going to come back in the House, Chris Wayne, 8 months ago, I think, 12 months ago. They were supposed to bring this bill in. They even announced that the bill was coming. They took it to their caucus that day, and the caucus said, whoa, wait a minute. We don't agree with this. And it stopped. Now, Chris and Wayne and I, we go to the NDP caucus. I don't know exactly what happened in the Conservative caucus when that bill came. But I'm willing to bet a lot of money that the arguments on the floor of the Conservative caucus meeting were not this bill's not democratic enough. That was not the discussion that took place. You know that, and I know that. It also came out, interestingly, during the hearings that one of the MPs on the Conservative side was bragging about how he brought the minister in to consult about some issues. Now, they were good issues. I'm not faulting him on that. But I am pointing out that he's the only MP I know that got any input, and guess what? He's a card-carrying Conservative member. They're the only people that have got a say in this. It's scary. Some of our presenters have talked about the fact, Peter was talking about the fact that there are national experts and international experts, hundreds of them. And the ones in Canada are saying, what are you doing to our system? And the ones outside Canada are saying, what are you doing, Canada? We hold you up as a model of a mature, modern democracy that's always fighting to be better. And here you are taking huge steps backwards. What are you doing? And it has implications on the international stage, my friends, because other countries do look at countries like Canada, especially, and I've been to a lot of them because of the privileges I've had as a member of Parliament to travel to a lot of countries. I've done election observation missions where the democracies are emerging and they're struggling, trying to get their foothold. And the people that are fighting to get the power away from those that have it now point to countries like Canada and say, that's the kind of thing we need. And when Canada does something like this, what it says to those who don't want their people to have democracy, ooh, we got some cover. We can either refuse to do things a certain way or back up ourselves because we can now play the Canada card in our favor, rather than historically Canada's critical role on the international stage of trying to be a leader in terms of what's right, because we don't have the army and economy and population to be anything else in terms of throwing our weight around. We try to develop that positive democratic reputation, and then we throw that weight around, and it matters. This bill takes away from that, so it hurts us as a country internally in terms of our ability to have free and fair elections, but it also affects on the international stage the ability of other human beings and fellow citizens that are fighting to get the very democracy that's being taken away from us. That's another reason why it's important for you to be here and for us to care about this. I want to just quickly, if I can, the process, in addition to no consultation, as was mentioned, they dropped the bill in the House of Commons, and within a couple of days, one of the first things they did was move a closure motion to shut down debate. And you know what their argument was? Well, you know, here on the floor of the House of Commons, it's mostly just showboating, and people are playing to the cameras, and it's all just a big theater. What we want to do is get this bill to committee where they can roll up their sleeves and get some real good work done. That was their argument for shutting down debate on the floor of the House of Commons and sending it to committee after only a couple of days. They moved that motion as quick as they procedurally could to shut down debate. So it gets to committee. Now, it turns out that I'm a member of that committee. It's PROC, it's Procedure and House Affairs. It's sort of one of the governing committees. The Speaker sends things there. Anything that affects all of Parliament, this is the committee that deals with that, as well as individual members' rights and things of that nature. And I happen to be a member of that committee. And so one of the first things I did, given my experience dealing with this kind of stuff with Mike Harris, remember those battles? So none of this looked new to me. I'd seen all this before. So the first thing I did was I moved a motion saying, all right, first thing we're going to do, government, is we're going to take this bill out across Canada. We're going to give Canadians an opportunity to have their say. Government refused. The government refused. And so it was necessary to make the point and to get something from them for me to actually filibuster for a number of hours. We were never going to win ultimately everything. 1 minute, my goodness. So what we did was we took command of the floor, and I wouldn't let go until we got as much as we could out of them. We got some concessions and slowed it down a bit, because the more we can slow it down, the more the Canadian people have a chance to see what's going on, and then they can pass their judgment. Because remember, my friends, there's always something wrong with a process that allows a party that gets 39% of the vote to get 100% of the power. That's wrong, and that's why ultimately we need proportional representation. There's a whole... If I could just touch on just a couple issues, I will try and do it quickly. The education piece really is important. Why, ask yourself, why would the Canadian government say to the Chief Electoral Officer, you can no longer be involved in education programs that help motivate Canadians to run? The government has said that's not the Chief Electoral Officer's job, that belongs to political parties. Give me a break. Political parties during elections, what they're doing is trying to find voters, but they're trying to find voters to vote for their party. They're not looking to increase overall. Come on, we're in the middle of a fight there. So this was meant to suppress that vote. Make no mistake, that is what's going on. Anybody who has any doubt, go take a look at the U.S. and some of the ID laws that are being fought down there. This stuff is not new. We've seen this before. I want to tell you, the government will brag about the fact that that they're going to introduce legislation that requires certain ID. And I'm not going to go into great length about it, except to say this to you. Government says that the voter identification card makes them nuts when we call it a voter identification. It's a voter information card, they insist. But the thing is, there's going to be people under this law, if it passes the way it is. Here's what's going to happen, my friends. People are going to walk into the voting station. They're going to have their voter information card. They're going to walk up. They probably might even know the person who's working in the polling clerk because it's their neighbors in the polling booth. And they're going to hand them their voter information card, and they're going to point to their name on the list. And if they don't have a piece of ID with their address in their pocket and a second piece of ID, they're not going to be allowed to vote. So you're going to be standing there with a voter information card that has your name, your address, where you vote, and you're going to show up, and your name is going to be on the list, and you're going to be denied the right to vote. And the government said that's because there's such misinformation on the voter identification card, which is such a load of crap, because the address on there comes from all the databases that the government has a reach to. So if you have a driver's license, they can reach that information. If you have other ID with an address on it, they can reach that. And if your newest one is any one of those pieces, that's going to get captured. And so the voter identification card, which we think it should be, is not only an okay piece of ID, it's one of the most accurate ID there is, and the Chief Electoral Officer said so in the hearings that we're having. This is about denying Canadians the right to vote and doing everything to make them and encourage them to stay home. Last one I want to leave you. Oh, there's so many. The robocall in the news right now. And the government has said, of course, what's motivating their changes, a lot of it is to get rid of electoral fraud, which, by the way, other speakers have said there's no evidence of fraud. The Neufeld report that was reported to that talked about all the errors, it was just that. It was administrative errors. For instance, somebody walked up, a mom and her daughter go to a voting area. Mom votes, no problem. The daughter doesn't have the ID with them. They have everything else, but no ID with an address, because a lot of students don't have ID with addresses. So mom would say, that's my daughter. If she lives with me, I'll vouch for her. So the form is filled out. Don't forget, there's a form filled out for people who vouch. And in the place where it said name and relationship, rather than putting the actual name, the person working the polling station wrote mother rather than the woman's name. That's an administrative error, but that's the kind of thing the government's hiding behind to justify what they're doing. We don't have a crisis around people voting too often in Canada. We have a crisis with not enough people getting out and voting once. Let's go get them, folks.
Thank you for that. Next up, and no, don't worry about being offside on our timing. We're all good. So next up, we have our Member of Parliament, Wayne Marsden. Wayne, please come up.
Thanks, Dave, for giving my speech. As usual, I've written around the page, across the page, and we'll see what we can sort out. I've been an activist in this community for many years, and it came from a sense of what was just, and it came from a sense of our democratic rights. And I like to name things for what they are. And we today talk about the Government of Canada and Bill C-23, but let's be clear. This is all about the Conservative Party changing the rules to tilt it in their favour. There's no other way to label this. But one of the things you want to keep in mind when you're dealing with this government and the Prime Minister's office and the spin doctors that are in there and the spin doctors in the Conservative Party, they're masterful. Think about this statement. We had in the House, I won't name the member, but we had a member give testimony in the House, witness in that House about how he saw firsthand voter fraud. And he was called on it. And he admitted he lied, but he said, I misspoke. Where I come from, that's a lie. There's no two ways about it. And this Conservative Party, that is an example of how far they're prepared to go. Where is the honour? We go to the House of Commons with a role that's provided to us by democratic rights. You decide, we go there. And we carry in your name the honour of our community. And in this particular bill, I want to warn you about something, and I'll use an American example. When Bill Clinton was in office in the States, he did some things that were controversial, but the people loved him, and the Republicans knew that. And they said, how in the world can we get power back? That's as polite as I can be, Dave, by the way. I can hear you, see you. And and the reality is the Republicans looked at it and they said, if seniors and working people don't vote, we win. The people with power and money always vote because it's in their interests and they know it. So they went on radio and television. They created this silly thing called Fox News. And they said, all politicians lie, all politicians cheat, all politicians, they're in it for themselves. Why bother to vote? They're all the same. Have you ever heard that anyplace? Yeah. And they succeeded. A worker who works hard every day, goes back and forth to work, and on talk radio, he hears this. And you malign your politicians to the point where people become disengaged, they're frustrated, they're angry. Then we have political parties who make promises that don't follow through, and they have every right to be angry about that. But it's that insidious way that they've affected our democracy, because that's how you got the Prime Minister we have today, not just in the United States. You know, the American-style voter suppression was referenced here today, and I want to congratulate everybody here who spent the time, the presenters who spent the time to look at this bill. One of the things that I think the government has been very successful at, vouching is a very important part of this bill, but it's not the solely important part of this bill. Like a magician, they're holding up vouchering. They're having the debate on vouchering while the more insidious or other insidious things are being slid through. And the conversation is not broad enough. And as Dave said, they limited debate in the House because they want to stop the conversation, because they know at some point people across this country will begin to wake up that their democracy is under attack, their franchise is being taken away from them. How fundamental is that? Your right to vote is being, the situation is so distorted by this that it will actually remove people's right to vote. And so from the standpoint of our democracy, what I see here is healthy. Now, mind you, I know a few faces in this room. People have been in this battle for 30, 40, and even more years. But the reality is, I don't think we've ever seen something as significant, with as much significant impact on the people of our country, the voters of our country, as this bill. And so I congratulate the people who put this together. We've got to get the word out there. We've got to get Canadians more engaged, and we've got to do it right away. Thank you.
Thank you. Last but not least, our powerful punch just north of centre here, or south of centre, sorry, our MP, Chris Charlton. Please come up.
Thank you so much, and it won't surprise you that there's absolutely nothing left for me to say. There's been a number of really important themes around disenfranchisement that have been echoed by every single speaker here today, sometimes from different perspectives, from seniors, from Aboriginals, for the disabled, for newcomers in our communities, but the theme has always been the same. It's about a government trying to suppress voter turnout, and I think everybody here has agreed with that. It started with Duff Conacher. He laid out the 5 points that this Election Act has changed fundamentally about our democracy. And he told us at the end, write letters. He acknowledged right at the beginning that, you know, maybe that's all we can do right now because the Conservatives have a majority. But he still says, write letters. And one of the reasons he wants us to get engaged in this fight is because, thankfully, no government lasts forever. Not even majority governments last forever. So this is a fight. This is a fight for our democracy, and it is a fight about changing government. And the Conservatives know that. And that's why this bill is so important to them, because they obviously have a stake in the government not being changed. And that's what this is all about. It is about disenfranchisement. And it started, as others have already said, with robocalls, right? For those of you who don't know the short form for what the robocall term stands for, it's when the Conservatives were calling into ridings and telling people to go vote somewhere, except not at the right voting station. So you're actually being sent somewhere else to go vote. And when you showed up, your ID wasn't any good because you were at the wrong polling station, and you know that when you're rushing in at 10 to 8, you're dying to cast your ballot, but you're in the wrong place, you don't have another half hour to go drive across town to go to the place where you were actually supposed to be in the first place. This act deliberately adds to that by cutting down education and teaching people about the vote and making it more difficult to get out the vote. And Eric talked about that really passionately in his speech today. But we've also seen it in the past through negative advertising. All of you have probably reacted to the American-style, increasingly American-style TV advertisements that we see here that attack people rather than policies. And most Canadians react to that by saying, oh God, all politicians are the same. A pox on all their houses. This is disgusting. I don't even know why I should go bother and vote. And that's exactly what the Conservatives want us to take away from negative advertising, because they've gotten that tactic out of the Republican playbook. It worked in the States. If you can get your opponent's supporters to stay home because they're disgusted with the system, then the Conservatives, or in the U.S. case, the Republicans, win every time. Their supporters will come out to vote. They have a money and vested interest in getting out to vote and making sure that the right stays in power. So their objective is to make sure that everybody else stays home. They don't need you to go vote for them. They just got to make sure that you stay home. And they're doing it in other ways as well. We've heard from community groups who are now organizing, who are really active on all kinds of important social justice issues. And they're saying, you know what? I want to get a grassroots movement going. But I don't want to get partisan, because that's dirty now. And the Conservatives reinforce that by making it almost impossible for community groups to exist, because they're making their funding contingent on the fact that they don't do any advocacy, that they don't get political, or worse yet, that they get partisan. But all of these groups have a stake in who's in government. It doesn't matter whether you're an environmental group, whether you're fighting for democracy, whether you're fighting for better health care. It doesn't matter what the issue is. You will have a stake in who forms the next government. But this government is doing everything in its power to make sure that those groups don't become politically active and certainly don't become partisan active. And suddenly we've got this whole group of the most active people in our communities saying, yeah, I'm not really comfortable becoming partisan. And that actually feeds into the Conservative agenda and I think is completely counter to what we're all trying to achieve as social activists in our community. And when I speak to grade 5 students, first thing I ask them is, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they tell me they want to be firefighters, they want to be doctors, they want to be lawyers, they want to be wealthy. But nobody ever says they want to be a politician. And I say to them, how come? When you're at home and you've got 4 brothers and sisters and you want to watch something on TV, who decides? Do you get to decide what channel is on TV? And they say, no, my mom decides. Well, don't you want to decide? Yeah, I'd love that. Well, that's what politicians do. We're in the very privileged position of getting to make decisions on behalf of the people who elect us. I think everybody in this room should want to be a politician. And that's why this bill matters. We need to reinvigorate our democracy. We need to take back the political process. We need to say there is nothing dirty about being politically engaged. There is nothing dirty about being partisan. We have a right to vote. We need to fight for that right to vote. Our veterans did it, and we owe it to them and to us to continue to do the same thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all the awesome presenters and our members of Parliament that decided to join us today or could. One last greeting I bring from Brad Clark, and I'm sorry I didn't do it earlier, expressing his support, and he's sorry, Councillor Brad Clark, sorry. He's sorry he couldn't be here today, but he lauds what we're doing, and he hopes us well. At this point, I'm sure people have been fidgeting. We've been sitting here a long time. I'd like to take a brief 10-minute break so people can find washrooms, which are directly out these doors towards the sunlight at the other end of the courtyard. There's coffee. Please come back, and we'll have a bit of group work so that we can talk about what we've heard this morning and come up with either solutions or things we want to have resolved. So thank you. I'm going to...
By the way, Malcolm, I'll send you copies of the pictures.
Oh, did you? Great. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Send them to me.
Nice to meet you, Malcolm.
Thanks a lot, Kent. Take care, brother.
Good. Anyway, what does it work? Okay.
Make sure you keep drinking liquid. Yes, that's what I'm doing. All right, you too.
I was saying, I think all
Is she able to share? She wants to organize this meeting. On
the agenda, she's going to do it. So I just want to...
Yeah. Is that Tom Clippers?
Yeah.
Their meeting to be done. And just had a strong opinion.
We just chatted over...
Finally, she's
We're in the perfect spot.
Yes. I wasn't
Laura, Nicole.
Hi. How are you? Before I've seen you. Yeah. Can we put them up here? Yeah.
Yeah, you can work out the details. I just want you.
I'd like to introduce myself to some people, but I don't really want to wait in line, you know?
Yeah, yes.
Isn't that selfish of me? Yeah?
No, I don't know. Gotta be
Because
like,
I think over there, there's got to be 1, 2, 3, 4 people in line probably to talk to Christopherson.
oh, I wanted to say hi to him too. We could go over.
Well, maybe if you cut through this way, you get through faster. You know, around the glass and in.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes. I don't know. She's supposed to come back, or maybe she's waiting to talk to him.
I think that's what's happening.
Let's go over there.
No, I'm going to let it go. Okay, so you have to carry the ball for all of us. It's your job.
Sure.
I'm just kidding. I don't want to.
Really? Why not?
I'll do it another time.
He's really
I hate to rush everyone, but I need everyone to get back to their seats.
Trying to get us together.
Fill this in now.
Yeah? Yes. I can
back to you. Or
I can take them, or they can. Oh yeah, I'll just I'm fine. Or volunteer Hamilton if they want to. You know, if they want to. Or it's online.
Still do it online.
Yeah, either and if they pass it on, then thanks so much for your. I'm so. Thanks.
I'm sorry. I really need everyone to return to their seats. We are running out of time for council chambers.
Can we please grab our seats? We're going to get started. We only have half an hour left till we have to vacate this council chamber.
Have a seat. Thank you. Sorry, if everyone can take a seat, no problem. Unfortunately, our members had to leave. There's actually another engagement that they're all due to. But I have held back David Christofferson, and he's going to tell us what our timelines are looking at. And I think it's important to know this when we break out into our discussions. And I promise you, whatever we do today will go to MPs' offices, so they will know exactly what we come up with today. So, David, do you mind coming up and giving us a bit of a timeline on what's happening?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Great. Now I can finish my speech. So I left. No. All right. So here's where we are. On Monday, the PROC, the Procedure and House Affairs Committee that is studying C-23, will reconvene. We will hear from one more witness. Sorry, my staff is advising me to two witnesses to go, and then we're done any kind of public input. And then we immediately start doing what we call clause by clause, and it's literally what you do. You have the bill in front of you, the chair calls out clause 1, and then there's a discussion, an opportunity for any amendments, and then you vote on it, and then when it's finalized, then we move to clause 2, and we go all the way through it. Now you need to know this bill is about, give or take, 242 pages long. We have introduced, today at 5 o'clock is the deadline for introducing amendments. So later today and over the weekend, we should be able to start to suss out what changes the government is willing to make, if any. We have submitted about 100 amendments. Between the government's amendments and our amendments, it's very unlikely we're going to be finished by Thursday at 5 o'clock. But what you need to know is that at Thursday 5 o'clock, under the rules of the motion that the government rammed through the committee, on Thursday at 5 o'clock, whether we are done all the clauses or not, it's over. And the bill is deemed to be completed and forwarded back to the House. So that's the process. Last thing, if I can, Laura, as people were asking me, what can we do? There's not a lot of time. And make no mistake, that's deliberate. This rush, you finding out deadlines are zipping by in front of you, my friends, that's deliberate. That's deliberate. So the best that you can do right now, in our opinion, is to still keep up the pressure to the Prime Minister's office, to the Minister's office, and to all backbench MPs, starting with our own Hamilton backbench MPs, Conservative MPs, because if we can get enough of them to switch, we could actually stop the bill. All the opposition members are united in opposition, and so we only need, what, Tyler, 8, 10, I think is our 12. 12. If we got 12 Conservatives who just can't stomach this anti-democratic process, we could stop the bill. And remember, there's guys like Michael Chong who, build his career around democratic reform. He's got a motion, a bill in the House that he wants to discuss. So guys like that, we're looking at them saying, look, you want strong democracy. Here's an opportunity for you to stand up and put your vote where your mouth is and vote against this undemocratic bill. If we got a dozen of them, we could halt it. So, being Hamiltonians, we know about fighting, and we know about struggling, and we know about not giving up. So let's not give up and let them know that you're not going to let this bill pass without a whole lot of noise, and that you don't intend to forget. But before we get to that point, let's still keep focusing on those individual Conservatives, make it as difficult as possible for them to stand up and vote in favor of it. And for those who have a conscience, work on it. Work on it, because we could still stop this undemocratic bill. Thanks, Laura. I can't give you a definitive answer. I would be shocked, given how much political capital the government's invested in this, that they aren't going to whip it, a three-line whip. I'll be shocked. It's going to be tough, but you know, Malcolm is saying it's going to be tough to get these folks. Yes, it is. But you know what? Let's make it tough for them. You don't have the right to stand up and pronounce about democracy and about how you're in favor of democracy and you want big change, but you're going to be part of a government that takes our democracy backwards. Let's put pressure on that member and put the pressure on their vote. Your mouth goes off all the time. Let's see your vote take place in the House, really standing up for democracy. I think if you check our website, we've got them listed.
Yes.
We'll get them to Tom, and he'll disseminate them. That would be, check our NDP website, and Craig Scott, who's our critic for democratic reform.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it greatly. Thank you for your time.
This, everybody. Thanks so much. Keep democracy alive. Thanks.
All right, our fun part. It seems like everyone is raring to go. So if I can have our volunteers from Speak Now Hamilton that volunteer to facilitate for today, just come down for a moment, please.